yet. Oh, okay. We are here.
Now.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today. We're going to talk about the future of search and SEO. And we have altogether 4 of us talking about this very important topic. And we are looking forward to discuss what are the latest trends happening and what's going to happen within the next 12 months and some of latest Google's update. And yes, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Clarice Lin, the ROI doctor who helps small businesses and online stores get on Google and YouTube page 1. So I help with digital marketing and I focus specializing helping businesses to grow a blog and a YouTube channel. And that's me. So I'll let everyone do a brief introduction of themselves before we get started on the question. So who would like to be the first one?
Well, I'll go first. I think when you allow us to decide, it's going to be a bit of a disaster. We're like 3-year-old children. You have to tell us what to do.
Apologize. Yep, it's a good point. Go on, Jason.
All right, I will go on. Hi, I'm Jason Barnard. I'm the brand SERP guy. I've been in the internet since 1998. I created my first website, and it was a blue dog and a yellow koala cartoon, the year that Google was incorporated. So I've been kind of following along with Google, watching the algorithms as they grow. We did SEO for the website, but it was mostly kind of to do with cartoons and games for kids. And then in 2013, I started to specialize in brand SERPs, which is what your audience sees when they Google your brand name, your personal name, your podcast name, your conference name, your product name. It's the exact match for an entity. So it's really, really closely related to entity SEO. Kare Gabor talks about managing your entity identity, which I love because it rolls off the tongue so delightfully. And knowledge panels, which is all to do with how Google understands the entity. And obviously with entity SEO, the foundation is how well Google understands you and how confident it is in that understanding about who you are, what you do, and who your audience is. And I am obsessed by it.
Thank you, Jason. Sanjay?
Yeah, hi. I'm the director of the European Internet Marketing Institute in Germany, Mannheim, and I already did the introductory keynote. Maybe some of you have visited me already in the morning when we started the session. And I am a consultant for small and medium-sized companies and help them grow their business online.
Thank you. And Dan?
Hi, so my name is Dan Taylor. I'm head of research and development at Salt Agency. We're a UK-based agency, predominantly work with clients in the US and across mainland Europe, helping both with technical problem solving and growth strategies. And over years worked with people like Cloudflare, ProtonMail, and just a number of other kind of enterprise SaaS and tech companies.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Dan. And now we're going to get on to question 1. But before that, I'm going to give a quote by Sergey Brin, Google's co-founder. He mentioned that when they started Google years ago, their eventual vision was that eventually people wouldn't have to do a search query at all. You just have information come to you as you need it. So when you imagine a future when you don't search for information and it comes to you. And that's why when Google has been upgrading their algorithm over the years, having different major updates. They have mini updates and they have major updates. And one of the major updates last year in 2021 was the rollout of MUM, Google's multitask unified model, meant to focus more on solving complex user queries. So basically, it's like a machine learning model, for those of you who have not heard of it yet, that helps to understand not just written text, but any type of content. And this multi-model approach means that this algorithm can actually unlock information from different formats, which is video, visuals, audio, making connections between different types of information, enabling Google to provide better answers to complex search queries. Meaning that perhaps, for example, when you used to search for a query, for a question, maybe you want to search for 8 different questions to answer a complex query. Now it could be shortened perhaps, and also as well as also providing information across different barriers, different language, different geographical location. So it removes the language barriers. So with this advancement in AI and machine learning, so what we want to talk about today is understanding human language better than before. So how do you think that will impact the content and link building, and what can businesses do to produce better content so that they can rank better on Google search? So
Right.
yeah,
Well,
anyone? Yeah,
I had
Jason?
something just occurred to me as you were describing
Yeah.
that, which is a beautiful description of Mum and what it's aiming to do, is that knowledge panels are a great place to start playing with this stuff. Because the knowledge panel is exactly that. It's a summary of the information that Google understands about the company or the person, if you're searching for a person, that it brings together, and they state explicitly that the idea of the knowledge panel, which is on the right on desktop when you search for a person or a brand, is to bring together the summary of what you would find in the blue links if you click through to them all to find these pieces of information. And it summarizes in the knowledge panel the pieces of information that it feels are most relevant and helpful to the audience searching that entity name. So if you look at that from a brand perspective, if somebody's searching for your company, Google will summarize who you are, what you do, and who your audience is in that right-hand side. And it will show the information that it feels is most relevant. And with Calicube Pro, which is the SaaS platform I'm building, or I've built in fact, we are building up a system of templating this to see what kind of information Google shows about which types of entity, in which categories, in which geo regions. And it's absolutely fascinating. Oh, so the conclusion of all that is managing that information, what Google shows, is possible. It's not just Google who makes up its mind. You just need to educate the child that is Google, trying to understand what it is you are about, to show what you want it to show to your audience when they search your brand name.
And I think that one of the main points is we have to differentiate two different worlds. The one world is what is Google and what are the search engines, the voice recognition part. That's all the technical part that these companies are building. I think one of the most interesting part will be for the marketers. How are they going to develop their content? How are they going to prepare for the changes that are coming up? So I think that it is going to be a 50-50 deal. That means 50% will be needed to be done by robots and automation, by creating content through automated systems, because you won't be able to create so much content as a human being if you look at all the content that is being created on the internet. So there's the specialized content, and there I am exactly where Jason also is. Everything that has to do with the brand, that can be done manually and needs to be done manually, because that is really it is very connected with the brand. But if you have a store, an e-commerce uh, store on the internet, then the problem is you have to reach people, and I think it will be more difficult to overcome the noise of the information to promote your products. That's why there's a question from Mila. Is SEO really the focus? I suppose it is more important to understand the technologies behind the developments of our search engine and our voice recognition and other, and then to optimize the SEO.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Dan.
No, I was going to also say, to add to that as well, it's about probably understanding the change in perspective of what SEO actually means as a user acquisition channel. And further to the point Sanjay made, we know that Google is actively taking steps to denoise and create differentiation for searches, and that's through the different perspectives, links, and associated searches that Google knows users search for through search stacking when they refine queries over multiple iterations in one go, depending on the kind of content they click on and the understandings. But we can see Google actively trying to denoise that. So that element of uniqueness needs to stand there, but then kind of goes beyond the content production, the acquisition element, into why should Google show your content ahead of someone else's when, in theory, the actual message, the perspectives and the iterations might be the same? And that then builds into brand, eat, the entity resemblance you have, and everything else is kind of not just kind of looking at SEO anymore as the standard, here's some keywords, here's some search volume, here's some backlinks, let's go party on. It's understanding now we have to show the perspectives of the users and look at it in a completely different light as to how we have probably over the past decade. And that's just because as technologies are being introduced, they've advanced much faster than probably some marketplaces have, but users have continued, and we just have to transition businesses along with that.
Right. That's brilliant. I just wanted to come back to what Sanjay was saying about Mila's question. Kind of the focus on SEO, but in fact, what we're now in a situation, from my perspective at least, is we're creating this content, we're pushing it out. We don't focus entirely on our own sites anymore. We need to push it out onto these different platforms. So it becomes digital marketing content that we're creating, which makes marketers and digital marketers much more confident and comfortable, because the art of SEO, or the art and science of SEO, is going to be taking this content that we're creating for other platforms and for our audience on our own website and simply packaging it for Google and other search engines, which, if you approach it from that, you're saying my content needs to make business sense on its own, and I package it for Google as a bonus. And I think that's a really intelligent approach for the coming years in digital marketing and SEO.
Yes.
And I totally agree to Dan, because Google is denoising. The problem is my brand, that's the question we have to ask, is my brand being denoised?
I think in the quality rater guidelines, there's a lot of obviously emphasis on needs met, rating scales, and EAT. But one of the other things in there, which for me has flown under the radar significantly in the past few years, is the notion of beneficial purpose, which they highlight in there. And I see a lot even with some of the brands we work with where they're reiterating a similar message as to what is already on the internet, but the content is not being indexed. And then there's the difference of indexed and the serving index, and how Google reports on that in Search Console, which, let's be candid, wasn't designed of humans. And it's breaking down that notion of actually having a beneficial purpose to that content. And we saw this years ago with e-commerce and base e-commerce. And I think it was in 2016, 2017, Rand at Moz did a Whiteboard Friday on granola bars, and he gave the example of if you've got 99 products all talking about calorie, ingredients, protein, fat, allergens, and then your content doesn't have those boxes ticked on that product page or another beneficial purpose, Google is still learning, it's still training from systems. It will go with cohort majority in cases where it has to make a split decision. So the old adage of SEO being a +1 is still there, but now it's almost like a +2 because you have to give that beneficial purpose to the user.
Yeah, that's a great point, Dan. And I think adding to that, having like the beneficial purpose, that also means that the same piece of information might have different levels or different level of priorities for different people. So that's kind of a layer on top of a layer. And that's kind of like when you package this information, it's not just for one group of people. You might have to repackage the same information in a slightly different way, maybe to speak like maybe using a different wrapping paper, but it's the same item for a different person. Because this person likes a pink color, so you maybe use a pink wrapping paper versus a blue wrapping paper, but essentially inside is the same item. It's just kind of like presenting it in a different way, so they find it more appealing and more useful, and then they're like, oh, right, that's like, for me, that's useful for me, because they can see it straight away. Yeah, so
Brilliant.
it could also be.
And make sure that Google's fingers aren't too fat and fiddly to open up the wrapping paper. Make sure you've wrapped it up in a way that Google can open it up. So I'm running with your analogy. I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's like kind of like a good point, and that's why I think this is probably still the first stage of the improvement of Google algorithm. That's like definitely different stage as we kind of go along. Even I would say even ordering the same information in different way, or putting it in different formats, that could also kind of like be part of what a business or like a brand should be doing as well, because there could be people who, you know, will be more likely to read those information. Like I see people thinking about search, they're thinking about blog posts or like creating videos content, because some people might enjoy watching videos rather than reading like maybe a 2,500 word article.
Well,
So
that kind of ties in to something that we saw Google do. I think it was last year, the year before. I mean, we've all merged together when it started doing snippet indexing and bringing it through, and for specific queries and specific pieces of content. For me personally, whilst everyone was snippet indexing something else to optimize for, snippet indexing for me from Google was the biggest smack in the face that as webmasters we failed the internet in providing content in a good way, and that's going to Google's time to result metric. In the sense where if Google's having to scroll your page and pull the information out relevant to a query just so the user doesn't have to go for 1,000 words of non-relevant stuff, like on a recipe page, how the recipe made you feel as a 5-year-old or whatever, he pulls it through. That for me is a failure for us on the internet, and we should have looked at that and taken, right, well, we can see these queries, people are wanting to find out XYZ, so let's load the value proposition and beneficial purpose of a page higher up, make that part of the main content, make the main content highly meets the user need, and then that falls into clicks, user engagement, everything else you want to follow on. It all makes sense.
That's really, really nice. I mean, I've been working on FAQs a lot, which comes back to the idea of kind of answering questions. And that needs met idea is for a lot of questions and answers, people just want a really quick answer to a really simple question, especially on mobile. And I get really frustrated with the skyscraper articles that I have to scroll through, and it tells me, as you said, how it made me feel as a 5-year-old, or what is Ubuntu when I'm looking for the command line for Ubuntu to add a user or something. And that's incredibly frustrating. And we've had great success with the clients, just saying one page, one FAQ, one question answer. And if the answer is 50 words, the answer is 50 words. And Google doesn't actually judge it on that. It judges on, did I understand the content? Can I understand it? Does this meet the needs of my user? And the needs of the user are, as you said, Dan, getting to the results, getting to the solution as efficiently as possible. The guys at Bing talk about that all the time. I did some interviews with them, and Minaz Merchant just kept saying, our whole point is getting our users to the solution to their problem as efficiently as possible. And the word efficiently really stands out, mainly because he said it about 20 times. But that is how important he thought that was.
Yeah. I think if efficient, sorry.
No, please.
Yeah. So I think efficient is a really good point, but at the same time, we still have to remember about the context behind the thing. Because sometimes, as what Dan was talking about, the snippets, right? When I click on some of the snippets, it didn't make any sense to me in some cases because it was pulling out information that wasn't what I was looking for. It was kind of the answer, but not exactly what it was, because the context just wasn't there.
Sure.
So I think there's still improvement on it, even if you want to get to an answer quickly. In some cases, like how can Google improve this algorithm to actually pull the right answer with the right context as efficiently as possible?
And maybe we also have to put something into the future of search. The thing is, are we going to rely on what Google finds and wants to tell us? Because I find it, especially in these political times, very, 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 very difficult to really understand or to really figure out which information is valid, what is fake news, and how are other people using SEO to get their opinion to the market. And what is your opinion about SEO and censorship? Because if Google reduces the results or is only concentrating on some, it could be very biased.
I think this is maybe where I feel like there needs to be maybe like a more neutral party coming in place. I think it's kind of like maybe an association or thing to have a more, as what you say, a neutral standpoint. Because if we are getting all from Google's perspective, I think the neutrality is quite difficult to balance and achieve between them wanting to make money, they wanting to kind of censor things, and what can be censored or what can't be censored. There are multiple layers to it. It might seem intuitive to some, but in some cases, it might not be that straightforward. So then maybe there needs to be something as an external party that comes into play.
Yeah, I mean, I can relate to that a great deal. I mean, from a more pragmatic level, talking about your own brand or your clients, it's our responsibility to find the means to educate Google, so at least it has the facts straight in its little brain, and that it's confident in the facts, and it gets the facts from us and not from somebody else. And I talk a lot about the concept of an entity home, which is that every entity has one page that represents it on the web. And Google's actively looking for this. And the entity home should be provided by the entity itself. So the brand about page would be a great example, or my about page on my own personal website. And Google is actively looking for that, because what it has is a view of that entity, an understanding of that entity with fragmented parts. So it's got this fragmented, broken plate in its hands, and it's trying to put it together. And if it can put it together, it isn't sure, because it's got information from Twitter, from Facebook, from Crunchbase, from Wikipedia, from Wikidata, from IMDb, from MusicBrainz, all of these different sources. It puts a puzzle together and it looks and it says, well, I'm not sure. But if it can go to the entity home, the entity itself, get the message from the entity home presents that plate puzzle that Google has in its entirety, fully put together correctly. And then Google can say, right, yes, I have got this right. And if you look in knowledge panels, you'll see there's a little world icon with a URL next to it. Yeah. That's the entity home. So the biggest trick to play on Google, or the biggest way to educate Google to get it to understand the facts and hopefully avoid that misinformation or information from the competitors or whatever, or misunderstanding on Google's part, is to absolutely nail that entity home today. Because once you've done that, you can feed Google the information about your brand with your brand voice and get the facts straight in this child's mind.
I think the other way to look at it as well is probably not from a slightly less pragmatic manner, is the extent of which Google can actually police, control, and influence. So I know pre-COVID they were working with a number of organizations specifically to focus on the support and making sure that independent news sites, especially in sensitive areas, were able to be served through preventing things like distributed denial of service attacks and other kind of phishing scams. I know other search engines have partnered with third parties made up of committees of publishers and other areas as well, to kind of sense check and fact check other elements for both their serve. But when Google does that to an extent through Google News, however, you kind of, as we refer to Google as the child, it is susceptible still to that mass media kind of. I think way back when, and as Jason's pointed out, he'll know this probably a little bit better for me. You used to be able to Google bomb, when you used to be able to trick it with loads of fake news stories to get stuff ranking for different queries. It is still susceptible to that, even 5-6 years ago. We've seen that, and I kind of feel then you are reliant on that end user, because when it comes to anything political, or even down to homestead politics with sports or anything less trivial than what's going on in the world right now, users will have a bias to certain news sources over others. So that's where we'll potentially see elements of that small personalization bubble come through for search, but there's still a heavy reliance on that end user to fact check and make sure that they're not going down the garden path, so to speak, to a dead end on their own.
Right. And yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think we can't actually depend on Google for everything. In a sense, that responsibility kind of goes both ways. There's a role for Google and maybe getting an external party, but in a way, like the end user needs to, at the end of the day, exercise some kind of caution, learn, understand, and pick out the right sources and be able to make the judgment.
Yeah. So the issue we end up with is with companies like Google and other large web giants essentially creating decisions on what content is and isn't allowed on the internet. And I'm pretty sure for some countries right now, we call that censorship, and we're pretty active against it. So we almost need that herd mentality to decide what is and isn't right, and make sure that the herd publishes the right information in the right volume to the right audiences.
So Amila just put a question in that was quite interesting. Do you think the content produced in AI platforms can rank better because of the algorithm changes? At the moment, I would say that these platforms are very well equipped with the knowledge of how to rank well in Google, and Google, it's just like it's a race. So when Google develops a new algorithm, all these platforms like Jarvis and Copy.ai, they optimize their content so that it fulfills the rules of Google. Now, the interesting part will be if the Google AI one day will be able to discover what is human written and what is robot written. And the problem is that AI is getting so mainstream. It's payable. You can order it at Fiverr. You can get all the experts who can do this stuff for you. So Amila, yes, I think that the content produced on these platforms rank well, but I wouldn't rely on it forever. So I would always do 50-50. 50 is done automatically and 50 done manually to create this bond between Google and your individual content.
Right. Really. Oh, sorry, Dan.
No, please, Jason, go on.
Sorry, what you just said there really reminds me what Andrea Volpini from WordLift talks a great deal about, is the dance with the machine, and that idea that the machine can give you the starting point, but the human needs to dance with that machine by correcting it, pushing it back in, so the machine gets progressively better, but will always be corrected by the human being. Who, I mean, it's a really nice dance kind of cycle going around. But I was reading an article by Bill Slawski about author vectors, which I find really interesting. Of the idea, I mean, Bill Slawski was saying when he reads a patent, he can tell who wrote the patent without actually looking at the name, because patent writers have a style, and he uses various authors, George Orwell or Charles Dickens as an example, is that you can recognize the author from the style. And what Google's patents are saying is that we can do this. So the problem with a machine is it wouldn't have a dedicated style. It would have a style that depends on the information and data that's being fed into it. So I think whether Google can do that or not now, it's certainly something you're moving towards, because if you're going to apply EAT factors to anybody or any brand, that style and that brand voice is going to be vitally important. And Google has to be aiming to understand that so that it can filter out what is and isn't being said by the brand, the expert, the person, and the authority, or whatever it might be.
I mean, just to kind of 2 points to kind of add to that. I mean, the easiest way of protecting ownership that Google did have was Google Plus, but then I kind of feel that Google probably saw that the only people really maintaining Google Plus are SEOs and other digital marketers, and we're pretty vocal bunch anyway, so we probably didn't need like the sign of a post in the end to find us. In relation to the tools that generate the copy, I've tested about a dozen, both AI for writers and content rewriters, for want of a better word, not the spinners, but the AI rewriters. And some perform better than others, all on personal sites, just to caveat this through complete holisticness. Others, Google does detect and is detecting that the content isn't human, and is giving pure spam penalties to those test sites, which I've worked on. But it seems to be tied to the level of what they're using. And I think those using like I always get this like the GPT or GTP3, that whatever that one is, to the extent of a higher level, I think like Jarvis is working. Others are being detected, but one thing which they are very useful for is, for me, if you've got a topic you're writing about which is extensive, quite deep, fill it out with the headers you want and then let it autofill and almost do the content research for you. And especially if you use the syntaxes to make it quote its sources, it typically, especially the good AI writers, give you good content research elements.
Yeah, to add on to what Dan has just said, is that actually I've also tried a couple of those tools myself, and I realized that if there are already many existing content written about the topic, then maybe the AI can generate maybe more rich content around it. If nobody else has really written about it, it's just rubbish, because it's just rubbish in, rubbish out. To be more direct, this is kind of like how it works. Like this kind of tools is just basically based on what's being put in and kind of what's come out. And as what Jason has also rightly pointed out about the personality, yes, otherwise it's kind of like boring and the style is not the same. If what the tool is trying to do is to pull information from different style, and then it becomes like doesn't feel right. It doesn't reflect your brand, and you still need to kind of rewrite and reframe to a certain extent. So as what with Sanjay about that is that yes, you can use the tool maybe as a guideline to generate some kind of information on what other people are writing, but you actually still need to have the human perspective to actually craft it together, bring it together, and bring in your own flair.
Right. The garbage in, garbage out point is delightful, because what I actually tried to do initially with those machines was, because with CaliCube Pro, what we're doing is building the entity at home, writing a clear description, and then pushing that information out around the world to get that plate to fit together correctly for Google with corroborative information that supports the shape of that plate or the way you put that plate together. And I tried them to write factual descriptions about companies and people. And they just made up facts. It was astonishing how absolutely rubbish. They just came up with lots of, apparently I worked for Google, founded multiple multi-million dollar companies, neither of which are true. When I asked it to write from my own bio plus some other information around the web. So what we're now trying to do with WordLift, Andrea's trying to help me, is trying to feed into it this kind of structure of the style, the factual nature, the way it's laid out, but also using schema markup and using the fields from schema markup to establish the facts, and trying to get the machine to restrict itself to the facts that we're giving it and not start making stuff up. And I thought it would be easy, and of course it isn't. So it's a work in progress.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, featured snippets, placement, and should businesses optimize their content for featured snippets? Yeah, I think it is just like everybody has been saying, we just need to take one piece of content and wrap it up for different purposes. So featured snippets, I like to use the same content for SEO, for rich snippets, feature snippets. I use it for my content, but I just optimize it for the real target group, just like Clarice very well described, wrapping the content up. So it will be more work, not only creating the content, but also spending time in wrapping it up for the real audience. And that's what marketers and juries, Mr. Trellis, sorry if I misspelled your name or didn't get it right, but I think that it will be like a buffet. You'll have to find different content or different ways to package it, and then this will be the daily work of a good marketer.
Definitely. I would say that's a really great point about that. I think just optimizing for the, for the general to get that featured snippet position for people who you don't really want to visit your website is actually not the ultimate goal. You actually want people who will become your customers. So packaging with the right wrapping paper is definitely the way forward, because you don't want any random dude to come to your site.
Oh, sorry, yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. The thing is, featured snippets is kind of, people get really obsessed about them because they're right at the top and it's branding, but potentially not visitors. But one interesting thing that I kind of think, and it leads into, it's Daniel's question about entities and entity SEO, is the featured snippet is a step on the way to that understanding. So once you see a featured snippet, what it means is that Google's algorithms can analyze the text and understand the implicit question behind the answer that text or that content provides. And Ali Alvi from Bing, who is the feature snippet, they call it Q&A, he's the head of that algorithm at Bing. And there are a couple of things that he mentioned. I did an interview with him, one of which is that they find what the aim of the algorithm is, to find the implicit question behind the answer. So, sorry, the question behind the, well, whatever it is, but you understand.
Yeah.
And the other is that they summarize, extract entities without looking in the knowledge graph, in Bing's knowledge graph at least. And they're making best guesses at entities, which then allows them to improve the knowledge graph algorithms that then try to fully understand the entities. So the feature snippets are this really neat step on the way to that understanding, and to understand that your content is written in a way that these machines can understand, a way that is going to educate the child. And one more point about the snippet algorithm, because it actually drives the feature snippets and the snippets underneath the blue links in the blue link results, and the knowledge panel snippets when they're written by Google, which has happened or is starting to happen, but also in the selection of the description you see in the knowledge panel. And more than that, in Bing at least, and I would imagine in Google, it feeds into all their other products, including Microsoft Word, Microsoft Excel, all of these different programs. So when they're building these algorithms to feed and to serve the SEO, the search results, they're also using them in all their other technologies. And that's something to be aware of and to think about. Not particularly important desperately, but it is actually much wider implications and much wider application than we perhaps realize.
Yeah, I'd also just add to that as well, because I know the question specifically is more on how to prepare for it, which from my perspective, I wouldn't go out my way and explicitly think I'm writing this content to include these entities to do X, Y, Z. The way I would look at it is if I'm writing an article on topic X, I naturally want to include and make it thorough for the user, and by natural inclusion, including the relevant topics and perspectives. I know Google uses a lot of examples in its blogs and pages around the outdoors and hiking, camping, and stuff, because I think they're really good examples to explain it. So if you're looking at walking boots and you're going to be looking at specific trails, you want to know, are they durable, comfortable, waterproof, quick dry, are certain clothes wicking for sweat, etc. For me, if you're going to produce content anyway, that content should be including those elements, and it should make it clear for a user, these boots, named entity, do X, Y, Z, which is the relationship then between the use case, which will then the use case itself be another entity. Do that in enough plain text, Google can understand it, and the user gets the value. Google understands the beneficial purpose. The rest of the internet will likely and hopefully be saying the same as you, so Google can verify that you're actually being accurate and you're not saying that these shoes will make you walk on water or something like that. And then you stand a better chance of ranking because you've got a verified beneficial purpose.
And actually, I wanted to add on to this was to relate to link building as well. I think we talk about how we create our own content and how you are linking within your own content and linking out to other people's content and people linking to our content. So as what I think Sanjay was saying about that, it was about not linking out to every site that you can see and not just randomly linking, because all of those links is actually a signal to Google telling Google about the context of your content. So if you start linking to every single thing and you try to say that, oh, this is to everything, then it confuses the algorithm and it's not going to help your content stand out in any shape or form. So you have to be really selective about, okay, so who is this meant for? And you link to that precise few identified websites or your other content itself. If you start linking to everything, basically, it's just random. It doesn't make any sense to anyone at all.
Isabella also talked about video type content, and that is going to be very exciting, because what I recommend to customers, and that has worked very well, is to use transcriptions and allow Google to index the content of the video through a transcription. It can be done half automatically, completely, or even manually. But basically, if you create your videos, it should be always in your mind that you're creating them for human beings first. But when you're creating or writing the script, also think about how would a machine or an algorithm interpret this content? Is the message clear in the video? And that is the new art of video making, that it is not a journalistic view or a journalistic point of video style, but it has to be a SEO video style. And for that, we need to rewrite the scripts in the future to take care that Google also understands what is in the videos. That was a question from Isabella.
That's kind of really interesting. We're doing a lot of video at Kalicube, and part of that was an experiment to see how much video we could get onto our brand SERP. So now, a year ago, when you search Kalicube, it was just 10 blue links. Now we get 6 videos on the brand search for Kalicube because we've created this content, and Google can see that this content is relevant, helpful, and valuable to our audience. So it shows it. We're getting the video boxes, but we're also getting YouTube boxes, which is the feed from our YouTube channel. And one of the techniques we've used is exactly what you're saying, Sanjay. And we found that better still than transcripts. Transcripts are great, but it's captions. When you look at the captions that Google and YouTube generate, they're absolute rubbish some of the time. And the thing about captions is I started doing it because I knew that a large proportion of our audience are not Anglophone by maternal language, and we put them up actually to help our users, and we realized that Google actually, as you said, really goes for this. And what we found is this discussion, for example, is slightly fragmented. We're going to repeat little phrases. We're going to say and that confuses the algorithms an awful lot. And we adapt the captions very slightly to make them make sense as written phrases. So when you read them, they make sense. And even as you're listening to somebody saying something very slightly different, it's actually still really good for the user. And that's a really nice kind of way that we've discovered, or we're happy using. I don't know if we discovered it, so I'm sure somebody else has done it many times before, to serve our audience and help Google to understand. And that's triggered this immense presence on our own brand set, but also ranking for other terms around, which is a big bonus for us. I keep coming back to bonuses, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think this is a really good question about one of the topics that I wanted to talk about was like on YouTube, video content. And one of the things is to enable users to find this information faster as well. This is good for, I think there is a role of video and there is a role for written content as well at the same time. Some people like to watch videos, some people don't. I belong to one of those who don't. So one of the really exciting for me was kind of the video chapters that YouTube has actually introduced, which allows you to go straight into that bit where they will answer that one question and that one part, which kind of helps as well. It's similar to the video chapters, is similar to having the featured snippet as well. In a way, yes, they give the answer, but you don't really know what was the context behind the entire answer as well. So it's good in a way, but I feel that if you feel the answer is not complete, you still need to watch the entire video. And that's when I feel that reading a blog post is faster for me rather than watching a 10-minute videos. In a way.
And with a blog post, you can use Control F. And on a video, I find myself trying to use Control F and getting very frustrated. But it depends on kind of what I'm looking for, obviously. But those chapters you've got, which bring up the key moments in the search results, those beautiful kind of blue links, is incredibly powerful. And that's using the chapters that they allow in YouTube. And what the last thing, kind of just one more point about kind of the YouTube aspect, is people tend to think that YouTube dominates because it belongs to Google, which may or may not be true. But when you were talking about context, is if you have schema markup and you present your videos in your own website sufficiently well, we've shown with Kalicube that we can actually dominate YouTube with the same video re-embedded in our own website. And the reason Google prefers that is because in YouTube, it's this massive kind of vague information. There isn't any context truly. But when you turn up on the website, on a web page, or within the context of the message that brand is giving, and Google will prefer it if you package, once again, you wrap in the blue wrapping paper you mentioned earlier on, you wrap your video in blue wrapping paper and take it away from the red wrapping paper that is YouTube.
Yeah.
Sorry, couldn't resist.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. And to answer that part, which does search engine recognize the topic of the video, that's when you need to put in, like, still at the end of the day, there needs to be an element of having the right keyword, more in a more conversational manner, including it in your title, your description, as well as the transcription. So if you have the transcription, you edit it correctly with the right spelling, grammar. I use Otter. That's a brilliant tool that I have discovered. Do you know, with my accent, right? I used to spend lots of time editing the transcription, and now actually it reduced about 70% of the time that I used to do transcription. So now I can do, for my every video, I can usually use that tool. So it becomes smarter each time round as well. So that's a good tool. Yeah, it becomes smarter. That's a really good tool for transcription, put in transcription, video chapters, everything with keywords. That's when then Google can kind of recognize the topic of your video better with the right context as well.
Brilliant.
Of course. So
Yeah, fantastic
Dan
stuff.
hasn't said anything for a while. I'm sure
Yeah.
Dan's got something to say about video.
Yes.
Okay, with 7 seconds left. Everything I agree with what's said. YouTube has got a lot better in the technologies it offers, and as a channel or as a platform itself in helping marketers get more out of it. And I kind of feel if you're going into something and you need to keep it, I mean, YouTube for me, you just need to keep it simple. And we know algorithmically it can be very hit and miss, and in terms of helping you reach wider audiences. But because of how versatile video can be, how it's incorporated in search, how it's incorporated in different elements, how you can use it for embedding, how you can use it for your brand search, entity relations, and how many of the content pieces you can spin from it, I would just say measuring the success of it, measure multiple different angles versus just what you achieve on YouTube or the platform, because you're going to not be pleased with the results immediately, and it's going to take a lot of work until you hit big numbers.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Dan. I think we are running out of time now. So thank you. I think we can conclude here. Unfortunately, we could have gone on for another hour. So thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Jason and Dan. And this was the last session of the first conference day. I hope all of you had a great productive day, enjoyed all the talks, and have some good takeaways. And I want to say a special thank you to our sponsors, Amplitude, Traffic Guard, TDO, TIDIO, Fremen, and TDA. And a huge thank you to our organizers and track hosts who work very hard to make this conference happen. And thank you very much to all the conference speakers. And we will see you tomorrow at 10 a.m. where Phil Pellon will open the second conference day with a talk, Branding is Your Secret Weapon.
Ooh.
And that comes to the end. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Stay
Paris.
healthy, everybody.
Right.
Yes, stay safe. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you
That was
so much.
delightful.
Thank you.
Oh, and we've got 10 seconds left at the
Yeah,
end
yeah,
every
we
time.
can do some dancing.
Thank you.
And goodbye.
Bye.
Goodbye.